To understand the cruelty inflicted on the people of Belarus, one must step into a world where fear was permanent. Starvation became widespread, villages disappeared, and entire communities were wiped from the map. When the Germans invaded the Soviet Union under Operation Barbarossa, Belarus was one of the first territories they entered. The Wehrmacht moved quickly, taking towns and cities with little initial resistance. But from the very beginning, the Nazi intention in Belarus was not just military conquest. They saw the region as a source of resources, a location for forced labor, and, most chillingly, a place where entire populations could be removed with little international notice. The Nazi ideology viewed many of the people living in Belarus as inferior, unworthy of rights, and expendable. With that belief as a foundation, the cruelty that followed was not random. It was part of a systematic plan. One of the first and most tragic actions the Germans took was the destruction of the Jewish population. Belarus had vibrant Jewish communities in towns and cities across the region, places where families had lived for generations. When the Nazis arrived, they immediately rounded up Jewish families, separating them from their neighbors, forcing them into ghettos, and trapping them behind walls and barbed wire. These ghettos were overcrowded, starved of supplies, and constantly guarded by armed soldiers. People inside lived with the knowledge that the ghettos were not temporary holding areas, but stages on the way to extermination. In many Belarusian towns, the killings began almost immediately. Groups of Jews were marched to fields, forests, or pits dug on the edge of villages and shot in large groups. Entire families, parents, children, grandparents, were executed together. German units, assisted by local collaborators in some cases, carried out these shootings publicly, making no attempt to hide the violence. The purpose was not only extermination, but also terror. By killing openly, the Nazis demonstrated absolute control and filled the remaining population with fear, ensuring that resistance appeared hopeless. Yet the brutality did not stop with the Jewish population. In Belarus, the Germans adopted a policy that targeted civilians regardless of ethnicity. The region quickly became one of the most dangerous places in German-occupied Europe because the Nazis believed that the local population either supported or could support Soviet partisans, fighters who operated in forests and attacked German supply lines. Because the Germans could not easily distinguish between fighters and civilians, they often treated entire villages as enemies. The result was a campaign of destruction that wiped out thousands of settlements. One of the most horrifying tactics used by the German army was the burning of entire villages. German soldiers would surround a settlement, block all roads leading out, and force the residents, men, women, and children, into a single building, often a barn or house. Once the people were trapped inside, the building was set on fire. Anyone who tried to escape was shot on sight. Villages were destroyed this way one after another. In Belarus alone, more than 5,000 villages were burned during the occupation, and many were never rebuilt. Some were erased so completely that no buildings, no records, and no surviving residents remain. These actions were not spontaneous. They were deliberate, ordered from higher command, and carried out as punishment when partisans attacked or when German losses occurred nearby. As these massacres continued, daily life for anyone who survived became a constant struggle. Food supplies were seized by German soldiers who confiscated grain, livestock, and anything edible. Villagers were left with almost nothing. Starvation became widespread, and many people died not from bullets or bombs, but from slow hunger. German patrols searched houses and farms regularly to take whatever they found, and anyone caught hiding food was beaten or shot. Families who had survived the destruction of their villages found themselves wandering through forests in search of shelter, constantly at risk from both German troops and the harsh climate. In addition to food, the Germans seized young men and women, forcing them into labor and transporting them to Germany. These Belarusian civilians were taken from their homes, loaded onto trains, and sent to work in factories, farms, and industrial plants deep inside the German Reich. They were seen as disposable labor, people who could be worked to exhaustion and replaced with new captives from occupied territory. Many of these forced laborers never returned home. Those who survived the war returned to Belarus years later with physical scars, exhaustion, and memories of harsh treatment. The German army also imposed severe occupation rules that turned daily life into a series of dangers. Curfews were enforced with violence, and anyone caught outside at the wrong time could be arrested or killed. Traveling between villages became risky because patrols searched roads and paths, looking for suspicious behavior. People lived with the constant fear that a knock on the door could mean arrest, deportation, or execution. Villagers had to navigate a world where every day brought new risks, and survival depended on luck as much as anything else. Resistance movements did form in Belarus, but their presence made life even more dangerous for civilians. Soviet partisan groups operated from forests, launching ambushes, sabotaging railways, and attacking German units. While these groups slowed the German war effort, the consequences for local villagers were devastating. Whenever partisans attacked, German forces responded with overwhelming brutality. Entire regions were declared partisan zones, and soldiers were ordered to eliminate all potential support. Villagers caught near areas of partisan activity were assumed to be helping them, even if they were innocent. The retaliation was swift, often involving mass shootings, burnings, and destruction of homes. This created an impossible situation for civilians. If they helped the partisans, they risked immediate execution by German forces. If they refused to help the partisans, they faced threats from the partisans themselves who needed food, shelter, and assistance to survive. Many villagers found themselves caught between two forces, with no safe choice and no protection. Families were forced to decide whether to give food to partisans, knowing that German soldiers could discover the missing supplies, or to refuse help and risk being punished by the fighters. No matter what people chose, the danger remained constant. Beyond the physical destruction and violence, there was also psychological terror. German soldiers conducted regular searches, questioning villagers, accusing them of hiding partisans or Jews, and threatening entire families. People learned to speak carefully, move cautiously, and avoid anything that could draw attention. Children grew up in an environment where gunfire, deportations, burned houses, and disappearances were normal. Fear became part of everyday life, shaping even the smallest decisions people made. By the time the Red Army pushed the Germans out of Belarus in 1944, the scale of destruction was almost unimaginable. Belarus lost a third of its entire population during the occupation, one of the highest proportions in all of Europe. Towns had been destroyed, farms ruined, infrastructure dismantled, and communities erased. The war did not simply damage Belarus, it reshaped it permanently. Families were torn apart, entire bloodlines ended, and many regions that had once been filled with life and culture were turned into silent forests and empty fields. The tragedy of Belarus under Nazi occupation shows that war is not only fought on battlefields, it is fought in the homes of civilians, in the streets of small towns, and in the forest where people hide for safety. The cruelty inflicted by the German army was not the result of a few violent individuals. It was the product of a systematic policy of terror designed to break the will of the population, eliminate resistance, and exploit the region for resources. It was an occupation built on the belief that some people did not deserve to live freely or at all. Understanding what happened in Belarus is important because it shows how ideology, military power, and dehumanization can transform ordinary soldiers into instruments of destruction. It shows how quickly a peaceful region can be turned into a landscape of fear when a regime uses violence as a tool of control. And it reminds us that behind every statistic from the war, every burned village, every execution site, every forced labor transport, there were real people with lives, families, and futures that were destroyed.